Audiobook, The Whole History of Assassin's Creed. Hi everyone. Audiobook, The Complete Story of Assassin's Creed. This will be a summary of the entire history of the Assassin's Creed universe, chronologically in a single video and as an audiobook. Tens of thousands of years before our time and before the Assassins or the Templars existed. The planet Earth was not inhabited by humans, but was inhabited by a race of beings known as the Precursors, those who came before, the first civilization or, more generally, the Isu. The Isu were beings classified as Homo sapiens divinus and who physically stood half a meter above the average human. Although its most notable features were that its DNA was not a double helix like ours, but rather a triple helix. And that they also did not have 5 senses like us, but 6, the 6th being that of knowledge. That allowed them to understand their environment in a way that would not be possible for humans. There is no record of the exact moment in which the Isu were born or appeared, although we do know that there is a dated and recorded period called the Isu era. Era of the Isu singularity, which began approximately 77,500 before Christ. Due to the great intelligence they possessed, granted by their 6th sense, and a longevity apparently superior to that of humans, the Isu developed into a futuristic civilization in our eyes. Who built incredible cities and kingdoms like Atlantis, located in the Mediterranean Sea. Eden, located in eastern Africa, or Asgard, located in northern Europe. Whose architectures seemed a combination of Sumerian, Egyptian, and Babylonian cultures. Although the metals used were alloys. It is known that there were racial subdivisions within the Isu, as demonstrated by the fact that the Asgardians saw themselves as totally different from the Greco-Romans. And we also know that there were various castes or families, although we only know the name of one of them, the Illuminati caste, to which both Juno and her husband Ida belonged, and probably also other very important Isu such as Jupiter, Minerva, Poseidon, or Aletheia. The Isu faced each other in multiple wars, building incredible weapons that they made with a special metal with amazing properties, the adamant, and at some point it occurred to them to use their vast technology to create a new species in their image that they could use both as manpower, as to fight in their wars. Thus was born the Anthropos project, in which the scientist Fans was able to create the first humans by genetically modifying already existing species. The objective was to make them strong, conscious, and servile, and Fans was successful in everything except servitude. Because those first humans did not submit to their desires. Therefore, Fans implanted adamant neural controls in the subject's brains, which allowed him to manipulate them using new devices that the Isu manufactured with this same metal. Thanks to that, Fans became the most renowned scientist in all of Eden. But it is here that he fell in love with a beautiful and intelligent human. Through surgery he removed her neural control and escaped with her from Eden to Atlantis, where they fathered a daughter together who was named Eve. Eva was the first hybrid between Isu and humans, and as she had no neural controls, she was immune to manipulation by the Eden artifacts. Furthermore, the Isu had created humans with only 5 senses, taking away the sense of knowledge to protect themselves from them, but Eva, thanks to her father's genes, she did have that dormant 6th sense inside her. Fans ended up being murdered and his name was removed from all historical records. But Eve survived, returned to Eden and stole one of the devices she used to awaken Adam and many other humans from the servitude to which they were subjected. Thanks to that, after years of slavery, the humans led by Eve rebelled against the Isu and used their own weapons against them, breaking out a war that was devastating for both races. Among the Isu there were different opinions about humans, the most radical being those shared by Juno and her husband Ida. She had been born in the year 2195 of the Isu era in Fi'ian. While Ida was one of the best minds of the caste, a true eminence in branches of scientific development such as biological research, planetary exploration, and energy efficiency. Both shared their repulsion for humans. Ida experimented on them, torturing or killing them if necessary, since in her opinion they had been created to serve and that was her function. While so Juno not only hated them, but she also considered them the same as animals and she believed that creating them had been a big mistake. Thoughts that became even more aggravated when her father, Cronus, was killed by a human at the beginning of the war between Isu and humans. That war had terrible consequences, not only because of the number of lives that were lost but because of something even worse. And the war distracted the Isu from the real threat that loomed over them, a coronal mass ejection from the sun that scientists had discovered. A solar eruption that would soon take place and that would eliminate all life on planet Earth if nothing was done to prevent it. Therefore, while the war between Isu and humans continued, the 3 most brilliant minds came together to save the world. They were the Isu. Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno. They built crypts to work in, each dedicated to a different method of salvation. Located underground to avoid surface warfare and also as a precaution in case their efforts failed. The knowledge of all the crypts was transmitted to a single place, the Great Temple, where the three collected samples and organized everything. From there they chose the 6 solutions that seemed most promising and devoted themselves to testing their possibilities. The first of them was to contain the wrath of the sun, for which they decided to build 4 large towers that would absorb and dissipate the solar flare. But then they realized that even with their knowledge and their greatest effort it would take too long, more than 1,000 years to build them. So they were forced to abandon the project even before the first tower was finished. The second option was to reject the embrace of the sun with a force field large enough to protect the entire planet. However, in this case they realized that they did not have enough energy for the planet, not even for a small portion of land. So they also had to resign. The third solution was related to the devices or fruits of Eden, since they discovered that with them they could materialize a thought that a human had and make what he imagined come true. Therefore, they decided to send several artifacts to the sky so that all the humans on the planet would then pronounce the phrase, "Make us safe." But unfortunately they had no way to control the fruits once sent into space. They were not able to direct their rays towards the world, so they also discarded it. Fourthly, they tried to travel to the past to be able to change it. They did not succeed, but they did develop enough technology to be able to calculate all possible futures, so they tried to see in the future if there was any method that would work to save the world. And what they discovered was that the solar flare was inevitable, that there was absolutely nothing they could do to prevent it. Although the human race would not be extinct, but humans would survive the catastrophe and expand during the subsequent millennia. Understanding, therefore, that they could not avoid the flare, they began to dedicate their efforts to search for methods with which, if they could not save the world, then will save Isu race. The fifth solution was to try to technologically improve their bodies so that they would become stronger and could resist the sun. To which Ida volunteered to see if it was possible, but his mind broke and went crazy during the experiment, which forced Juno to kill him so that he would not suffer. The sixth method was to try to transfer their minds to vessels that were stronger than their own bodies. And they succeeded, but they realized that, although their minds could enter those containers with ease, to get out they needed the sacrifice of another living being, so in the end they abandoned it too. In total they had tried 6 methods and all 6 had failed, but they still did not give up. But they secretly worked on a 7th method, which consisted of using a serum and a catalyst to transfer their genetic coding to the human race, and thus, those Isu who had done so, they could be reincarnated into humans who would survive the solar ejection. However, Jupiter and Minerva realized that if they did this they would corrupt the human genome forever, and that they had no way of knowing the disastrous changes that would occur in humanity. So they abandoned the idea, even knowing that this would mean the extinction of their own race. Even as they worked on all of these methods, Minerva continued to look into all possible futures, until she finally discovered that within many millennia another action of coronal mass from the sun would fall on planet Earth, destroying the human civilizations that had arisen during that transitional period. Then Minerva realized that, although she could not save the world from the first flare, maybe she could save it from the second one. So she returned with Jupiter to the towers of the first method and they automated the construction process so that the technology finished, which they couldn't due to lack of time, and then she chose a man from the future, a man named Desmond Miles. And she left him messages through time in places that no one but him could find, hoping that Desmond would go to the Great Temple and activate the towers there, which by then would be ready to protect the planet from the second solar flare. However, Minerva was not the only one with the necessary technology to calculate the future, because other Isu such as Aletheia or Odin could also do so. In the case of Odin, who was the ruler of Asgard, we know that at one point he was able to see his own death, which would be right after the solar flare, when he would be killed by an Isu named Fenrir. Obsessed with surviving, no matter what, Odin sought, found and defeated Fenrir to kill him beforehand. But just before doing so, Loki's friend revealed that Fenrir is actually his own son, the result of his relationship with Aletheia. As Odin had previously sworn not to shed Loki's blood, he was forced to keep Fenrir alive, although as a precaution he imprisoned him forever. It was then that Odin heard the rumor of the existence of the 7th method developed by Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno, a method that could allow him to survive his own death, and since he knew that in the end, Fenrir would escape and kill him, he allied himself with Juno, stole the serum and the catalyst and shared them with her in exchange for Juno telling him how it worked, explaining that his body would die, but that in the future he could be reborn as one of the humans. Odin took the stolen technology back to Asgard, but Juno improved it somehow. And she managed to use it to transfer Ida's essence into the DNA of humans. In this way, even though her husband had already died, Juno managed to save what was left of him and, while Odin would be reborn only once among humans, she made Ida reborn infinite times, as many times as possible as long as the human race continued to exist. Well, deep down, Juno had never wanted to save the world, but her intention had always been to conquer it. And she was not going to let death just overtake her. Therefore, she also began to leave her own messages to Desmond Miles, as well as a fruit of Eden with which she could communicate with the outside world. And then return to the Great Temple and destroy all the information that Minerva and Jupiter had left there to guide Desmond. When they discovered her betrayal, the two of them killed her and sealed the entrance to the Great Temple, but Juno actually survived. For she, following her sixth method of salvation, managed to leave her physical form in time and transfer her consciousness to the temple itself. So Juno stayed there, buried in the walls of the temple, waiting for the day when Desmond Miles and human technology would allow her to return. With the intention of conquering the world of the future, enslaving humans, and reuniting with her beloved Ida. At the same time, Loki wanted to avenge Fenrir's unjust imprisonment by killing one of Odin's many sons. To which he responded by sending a group of soldiers who mortally wounded Alethea, Loki's lover, and Fenrir's mother. Unable to cure her, the only thing Loki could do was use the sixth method of salvation to transfer Alethea's consciousness into a scepter of Eden. Thus it was that at last, in the year 2306 of the Isu era, some 75,200 years before Christ, the sun unleashed its wrath in what was known as the Toba catastrophe. And planet Earth was devastated by fire. Fenrir killed Odin, but just before that happened, he and 7 of his friends and family used the seventh method to reincarnate in the future. But also, and secretly, Loki sneaked into that same room, stole one of the catalysts and also used it. Hoping thus to be reborn like the others and in the future to search for the scepter where Alethea was imprisoned in order to be reunited with her. The earth shook for days and flames burned for weeks. When the ash settled, fewer than 10,000 humans remained and even fewer Isu. The catastrophe altered the Earth's atmosphere and reduced the amount of oxygen available, meaning that the Isu could never recover and that they would run out, extinguishing. But humans, on the other hand, had been made to resist, so they survived. Minerva and Jupiter were among the few Isu who had not perished, and they spent the following years traveling the world to try to rekindle the spark of civilization, teaching humans as much as they could be taught. But not even they were immortal, and in a last desperate act Minerva took one last look at the future, to know if all her efforts would be successful. And she then saw that Juno's consciousness was still alive in the Great Temple, from where she would try to manipulate Desmond in the future. So Minerva recorded one last message and then succumbed to a natural death. The last Isu are estimated to have died only a century after the Tova catastrophe. But they were never forgotten, because they remained in the memory of humanity in the form of divinities. So that the Isu ended up becoming gods in the collective imagination that different human cultures venerated during subsequent millennia. Even so, not all humans took them for omnipotent gods, but some knew the truth. They knew that these supposed gods had actually been beings of flesh and blood. That they had inhabited the world as a very advanced civilization and that they had created humans. Some of them felt such veneration for the Isu that, in the end, in the year 1334 before Christ, they ended up founding a secret society in Egypt known as the Order of the Ancients. It was a group of men and women who honored the Isu, collecting their lost artifacts. And they hidden in the upper echelons of society to control humanity from the shadows. Sometimes to accumulate knowledge and power and other times to guide it towards order. They believed that humans were imperfect and inferior beings whose only aspiration was to follow the example of the Isu. The Order of the Ancients soon expanded to Persia, whose kings they controlled for centuries. That included King Xerxes, although in his case he had 2 vassals, named Darius and Amyrxes. That they had realized that he was a tyrant and that under his rule the Persians were not safe. So in the end they ambushed him and Darius murdered him with a blade that he had made with his own hands. After Xerxes died, the new king was his son, Artaxerxes, whom Darius wanted to kill as a precaution. Because he knew that he too would be a puppet of the Order of the Ancients and that he would become another tyrant. But Amyrxes refused, because the king had not yet done anything wrong, so he joined the order to make sure, from within, that Artaxerxes would become a good governor and forced Darius to flee Persia with his family. Since then, Amyrxes dedicated himself not only to pursuing Darius, but also to hunting down human hybrids that had Isu blood in their veins. Because the order believed that these people harbored so much power within them that they were capable of destroying the world. And since the order sought peace through control, they wanted to avoid at all costs the chaos that the hybrids could cause. So they executed them beforehand with the intention of keeping the world safe. However, there was an Isu that did manage to stay alive during the 70,000 years following the Toba catastrophe. It was Hermes, the supreme scientist and engineer of Persephone in the kingdom of Elysium, who managed to survive throughout the millennia thanks to the scepter of Eden, where Alicia's consciousness was stored. Well, apparently that scepter had the ability to keep alive whoever was the bearer of it. Nowhere is it explained why, if the scepter granted immortality, Loki did not keep it in order to survive with his lover. And the only feasible answer would be that, when Loki had it, the scepter did not yet possess that power, so Loki had to use the seventh method and died. But then Hermes picked up the wand and improved it in some way so that it granted immortality. In any case, what happened was that thanks to it Hermes stayed alive until the 6th century before Christ. When he met the Greek Pythagoras, he gave him the rod and then died. Pythagoras became obsessed with the Isu, but some of his apprentices turned away from him and formed their own sects in Greece. The Cult of the Cosmos, an organization that, using threats, managed to control the Oracle of Delphi. Since then forcing the Pythonesses to defame lies that suited their interests. To control everything that happened in Greece and take advantage of it for personal benefits. Pythagoras was a hybrid of the Isu and, as he was obsession with them, he decided to mate with another hybrid so that the purity of his lineage would not be lost. The chosen one was Myrna, the daughter of King Leonidas of Sparta, with whom Pythagoras fathered 2 children, Cassandra and Alexos. But after that, since he had no interest in being a father, he left, never to return. For its part, the Cosmos cult had in its possession an Isu artifact that was capable of predicting the future. But it only worked if a hybrid used it, so they forced the Pythoness to prophesy that Alexos would destroy Sparta if he was not thrown off Mount Taygetus, with the idea that Myrna would leave him for dead and thus the cult could raise him according to their own interests. However, at the moment of truth, Cassandra tried to save her brother. In the impulse she caused both Alexos and the Spartan effort to fall. The others condemned her and she too was thrown off the cliff. Both Alexos and Cassandra survived the fall, but while the former was cared for by cult members, trained to become the strongest warrior in Greece and educated to use the artifact for his sect, Cassandra was left alone, had to flee Sparta and ended up shipwrecked in Kephallonia, where she remained for the next 20 years. After that time, a member of the cult located her and tried to use her, which was a big mistake, because Cassandra not only killed him, but also thanks to him she discovered the existence of the cult and learned that her mother was still alive. Determined to find her, Cassandra left Kephallonia and travelled through half of Greece in search of her. Although on the way she accidentally met Darius, who had arrived there with her son, Naiticos. While fleeing the Order of the Ancients, the Order had heard of Cassandra even from Persia, and knew that she was a hybrid of the Isu. So Amyrxes travelled to Greece with a small army to hunt her down. Darius, Cassandra, and Naiticos fought him effectively for a time. But Cassandra and Naiticos fell in love, slept together and had a son named Elpidio. But as Amyrxes' men pursued them, they ended up killing Naiticos before Darius and Cassandra killed them all, including Amyrxes himself. But she, knowing that her son would always be persecuted by her blood, decided to separate from him to keep him safe and gave him to Dario, who crossed the sea and took him to Egypt to hide him and raise him there. Trying to bear the pain of separation, Cassandra continued with her life. She found her mother and tried to get Alexos back, but the cult had driven him mad and Cassandra was forced to kill him. Hating the cult for everything it had done to her life and her family, Cassandra pursued and executed all of her members one by one until she completely exterminated them and destroyed the artifact they possessed. But the only thing she achieved with that was to leave a void in those lands ideal for the Order of the Ancients to expand its influence from Persia to Greece, and later, from Greece to Rome. Following her mother's instructions, Cassandra ended up finding Pythagoras in the ruins of ancient Atlantis, where Alypius communicated with them for the first time from inside his staff, manipulating them both so that Pythagoras would give the scepter to Cassandra. She died of old age right after and Cassandra felt obligated to live for 2,000 years until the time came to hand the rod to a woman from the future. Thus, Cassandra left Greece, leaving behind her family and her friends, and she spent the following centuries around the world in complete solitude. She was searching for artifacts from Eden by order of an Isu who was ultimately deceiving her and only using her to reunite with Loki in the future. A century later, the great Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great was murdered by a Babylonian woman called Ildhani. She who killed him using an ingenious poison, thus becoming along with Dario in one of the first people to emerge from the common people to fight to protect the world from tyrants. In the 1st century BC, Aya of Alexandria, a woman descended from Elpidias, the son of Cassandra, was born. And that as an adult she married Bayak of Siwa, a Medjay, that is, an elite warrior chosen by the pharaoh to protect the people of Egypt. They both had a son, Gemu. But the order of the ancients discovered that in Siwa, the territory guarded by Bayak, he had hidden a temple of the Isu. So they kidnapped Bayak and his son to force him to tell them about how to open the temple. However, Bayak had no idea how to do it, and when trying to free himself, the only thing he managed to do was causing the death of his son. Bayak survived, and, with the help of Aya, the pharaoh Cleopatra, and the hidden blade that Darius had forged, he dedicated himself body and soul to tracking down and murdering the men who had taken part in Gemu's death, which ended up leading him to pursue and hunt all the members of the Order of the Ancients. Unfortunately, before they could finish her work, Cleopatra betrayed them, allying herself with the Roman Julius Caesar and the Order of the Ancients themselves, thus repudiating both Bayak and Aya. Even though it had been largely thanks to the two of them that she had managed to seize power in Egypt. In disbelief that men as cruel and abusive as the members of the order, they were capable of manipulating the great governors of society and were also protected by them, Bayak and Aya decided on an opposing organization, the Hidden Ones, a brotherhood inspired by the feats achieved centuries before by Dario and Ildhani, who would work in the shadows to unmask, overthrow, and eliminate the order wherever it operated, and that he would always ensure the protection and safety of the common people. Thus, with the newly founded brotherhood, Bayak killed the last of the men who had murdered Gemu. And then Aya executed both Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, and then set up a base of the Hidden Ones in Rome, while Bayak set up his own in Memphis. Seeing the chaos that followed Caesar's death and the manipulation that the people could suffer with their image as protectors, both understood that they had to murder in secret without giving each other merits, hiding in plain sight to keep their identities hidden, and never endanger the lives of innocent people, thus creating the foundations of the creed by which the Brotherhood would be governed in years to come. With the rapid expansion of the Roman Empire during the time of Emperor Augustus, the Hidden Ones also grew. And by the end of the 1st century after Christ they had already established lairs in a territory that spanned from the British Isles to present-day India. With the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, the Hidden Ones abandoned some of their peripheral territories, and they ended up establishing themselves more strongly in the kingdoms and caliphates of the eastern Mediterranean. Precisely the opposite of the Order of the Ancients, who, with the rise of Christianity and Islam, they began to decline and ended up establishing their last ovation in the northwest of Europe, hereditarily led by the kings of the Kingdom of Wessex in Great Britain. This was the situation of both organizations in the 9th century, at which time they were finally reincarnated. At around the same time, all those Isu who had used the 7th salvation method just before the Toba catastrophe. That is, Odin, his 7 friends, and Loki. Loki himself was incarnated in Basim, a man who was born in the Abbasid Caliphate. While the randomness of the genes made Odin not reincarnate into another man, but rather into a woman, Ivor, who was born in Norway shortly after. Neither of them knew anything about the Isu or their reincarnation, because they believed they were normal humans, although both had strange visions that they interpreted in different ways, and that they were nothing more than a reflection of the consciences of Odin and Loki trying to awaken within them. In the year 861, Basim, fascinated by the occult and what they represented, joined the Brotherhood and trained to become a master assassin. But because of this he came into contact with one of the last remaining strongholds of the Order of the Ancients in the East, who told him that in Alamut there was a temple where he would find the answers he was looking for. As Basim was tortured by nightmares that he did not understand, he decided to investigate the temple, and inside it Loki's consciousness finally fully awakened. His personality and his memories merged with Basim's, and upon leaving Basim decided not to look for Aletheia, whose rod was still in the hands of Cassandra, but to seek and kill the reincarnation of Odin, to make him pay for everything he had made him suffer during the Isu era. A decade later, Basim was in charge of a young apprentice, Hizam, who in turn had clues to Kayatv, a member of the Order of the Ancients who resided in Norway. In Constantinople they both met a Norwegian named Sigurd, who was nothing but the reincarnation of Tyr, one of Odin's 7 friends. So, taking advantage of chance, Basim and Hizam accompanied him back to Norway with the excuse that Hizam would execute Kayatv. although in reality Basim hoped to find the reincarnation of Odin in northern Europe. Upon arriving home, Sigurd introduced Basim to Eivor, meeting the reincarnations of Loki and Odin face to face for the first time. But the fact that Eivor was a woman confused Basim, who did not recognize him. Hizam failed in his attempt to assassinate Kyav. Eivor saved him and executed his enemy with his own hands, but Gorm, Kyav's son, survived and fled. After that, Sigurd and Eivor left for England to govern their own land. And Basim and Hizam decided to accompany them, in principle to fight against the last bastion of the Order of the Ancients, who was in Great Britain, although secretly what Basim wanted was to continue searching for the reincarnation of Odin. As mentioned before, the leader of this last branch of the Order of the Ancients was the King of Wessex, who at that time was Alfred the Great. He was a devout Christian who not only did not want to be the leader of the order, but also took a dim view of the paganism that its members professed. Because they venerated the Isu as if they were gods when for him there was only one true God. They proposed a dogma contrary to God's purpose and saw humanity as inferior beings, instead of believing that all men could be better people. Deep inside him, Alfred thought that the Order of the Ancients should be exterminated, and that in its place he should create a new order that was superior, divine, and universal, inspired by God, for the benefit of man. When they arrived in Britain, Sigurd founded a village. Basim immediately set out in search of the reincarnation of Odin, and Hitham opened the first guard of the Hidden Ones since Roman times. And when King Alfred's spies informed him that a new cult had appeared in Mercia, he decided to contact Hitham and give him information about the order with the hope that its members would be executed. Hitham had been injured in his confrontation against Kyav and could not perform. But Eivor, always thinking about the benefit of his people, took over and murdered one by one all the members of the Order of the Ancients who were still alive. That included Gorm, who had in his possession a fruit of Eden, the same one that had belonged to the Isu Juno that she had prepared to be able to communicate with the outside world. Following the fruit's instructions, Gorm had traveled to North America, where Juno had instructed him to dig, to unearth the great temple where she was trapped. Gorm obeyed and unearthed the entrance just as Eivor, who had crossed the seas to reach him, found him and killed him. And since he did not know what that excavated grotto or that round artifact was, Eivor left the place, gave the fruit of Eden to the natives of the region, and he returned to England and continued hunting down the members of the order until none were left, except King Alfred himself, whose life Eivor spared when he discovered that he had been the one who had given him the information with which to destroy the Order of the Ancients. At the same time, Sigurd awakened his memories of the Isu era and understood that Eivor was the reincarnation of Odin. So he took it to an Isu machine that had been left ready underground in Norway, 75,000 years ago. But Vasim followed him secretly, finally understanding that Eivor was the reincarnation of Odin. So he attacked her with the intention of killing her. Eivor defeated him and connected him to the machine, which Sigurd then turned off, thus also turning off Vasim's mind, who remained alive, but trapped, condemning him to an eternal sleep from which he could not wake up at will as long as the machine remained off. Years later, Eivor ended up accepting the part of herself that was the Isu Odin and died a natural death in North America. But her legacy was terrible, for by completely annihilating the Order of the Ancients, King Alfred the Great had free rein to lay the foundations for his new organization, a hierarchical society of people who believed that humanity must be guided and controlled so that peace could prosper. That was the birth of the Templar Order. And just as they were the evolution of the Order of the Ancients, the Hidden Ones also evolved and in the Middle East became known as the Assassins. Thus, both groups pursued the same purpose, which was peace for all humanity. But the Assassins sought peace through freedom, with free will as the key to their philosophy, while the Templars believed that men were violent by nature and that the only way to achieve peace, it was through perfect order, controlled and imposed by force. Time passed until the end of the 12th century, when in the fortress of Masyaf, in Syria, the assassin's mentor, Al-Mualim, was corrupted by the power of the Isu artifacts and secretly allied himself with the Templars to find the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem, which contained a fruit of Eden. Betraying his new allies, Al-Mualim kept the artifact for himself and then, with the intention of eliminating all those who knew what that object was, he ordered the most skilled of all his assassins to kill one by one all the Templars with whom he had previously allied himself. That assassin was Al-Tahir ibn Lahajid, a man so skilled that at the age of 25 he had already reached the rank of master assassin, just as Cassandra had been. Al-Tahir was a hybrid, and the sixth sense of the Isu, that of knowledge, was dormant within him. in the form of an innate ability called eagle sight, which made him even deadlier than he already was. Al-Mualim tried to use the fruit of Eden to control him, but precisely since Al-Tahir was a hybrid, the artifact had no effect on him, and thanks to that his mind was free to, as he investigated and murdered the Templars. He began to understand that his mentor was hiding something from him, when finally his latest target confessed to him that in reality Al-Mualim was a Templar who had worked at all times to keep the fruit of Eden for his own benefit. Whereupon Al-Tahir was forced to return to Masyaf and kill him with his own hands. After that he became the mentor of the assassins, expanding them into new bases around the world. He married and fathered 2 sons, the eldest of whom he took with him to the east to fight the Mongol threat posed by Genghis Khan. His son successfully assassinated the enemy leader, but upon returning to Masyaf they discovered that they had been betrayed. Al-Tahir's other son, his wife, and his best friend had been murdered. He was forced to flee and spend 2 decades in exile, during which he dedicated himself to studying the fruit of Eden. Thanks to him, Al-Tahir developed new weapons, assassination techniques, and glimpsed part of the future. So he ended up writing a codex that spoke of the appearance of a prophet who would open a crypt of the Isu located in the Vatican. He eventually returned to the fortress, killed the usurper and regained control of Masyaf only to later dismantle it, ordering the Brotherhood to never again reside in large castles or places of obvious power. But they had to remain secret and operate from bases that could not be attacked or discovered. Then Al-Tahir gave the codex to Niccolo Polo and locked himself inside his own fortress to die a natural death, while his son and his men left Masyaf. In parallel, the French knight Jacques de Molay was born, a man who was actually a reincarnation of the Isu Ida. Not the first that existed in history, but the first that we know was relevant, since Jacques de Molay was the last Grand Master of the Templar Order. Before at the beginning of the 14th century, King Philip IV of France dismantled it and executed him. However, his ideals endured, because his last order was to send 9 of his most loyal men across the known world, so that they could continue with the objectives of the order in secret. In this way, the Templars, like the assassins, went into the shadows, being forced to disappear from the public eye and faking their disappearance. Although in reality they continued alive, exposing their ideas and plotting control from all spheres of society. From Niccolo Polo, the Altair Codex was inherited by the assassins of Italy, who unfortunately were attacked and stolen by the Templars. So the Codex arrived in the 15th century in the hands of the Spaniard Rodrigo Borgia, who read it and believed that he was the prophet mentioned. And he conspired to become Pope of Rome in order to gain access to the Isu crypt of the Vatican. His plans included Templar control of Florence, Venice, and Rome, but the assassin Giovanni Auditore was a constant obstacle in Florence, which made Rodrigo order him to be captured under a false pretext and executed along with his entire family. Unfortunately for Rodrigo, Eggio Auditore, Giovanni's second son, was away from home at the time of the attack. So he survived the execution and, with a strong desire to take revenge, Eggio dedicated the next 20 years of his life to training and hunt down one by one all the Italian Templars of Florence and Venice, in addition to recovering the Altair Codex, and steal from Rodrigo a fruit of Eden from Cyprus. With the Codex back in their hands, the assassins of Italy deduced that it was actually Eggio the prophet of whom Altair had spoken, and, knowing that Rodrigo was in the Vatican, Eggio went there to look for him, although in the end he spared his life and ended up opening the Isu crypt. Then the Isu Minerva appeared before him, since that was one of the many messages he had recorded for Guillermo Desmond in the past. Eggio understood absolutely nothing of what he heard. Minerva suddenly disappeared, and he could only return home. As soon as they arrived, Caesar Borgia, Rodrigo's son, attacked with an army, killed his uncle and stole the fruit, which made Eggio travel to Rome and work for the next 4 years in undermining the influence that the Borgias had in the city, to the point that Caesar, in a fit of madness, he killed his own father just before losing the fruit and being forced to flee. Eggio pursued him to Navarra, where he finally killed him, and after that, with the fruit back in his hands, he hid it in an Isu temple located beneath the Colosseum in Rome. With the Borgias dead and Templar influence eradicated from Italy, Eggio traveled to Constantinople, where he met his future wife, and then to Masalaf, where he found Altair's corpse and received a second message from the Isu, in this case from Jupiter, again addressing Desmond. Eventually, Eggio settled in Florence, where he fathered 2 children before passing away. Half a century after Eggio's death, the events seen in Assassin's Creed Shadows took place. And from there we jump to the beginning of the 18th century. Moment when the Welsh pirate Edward Kenway was shipwrecked in Cuba and met Duncan Walpole by chance. An assassin who had just betrayed the Brotherhood. After kill him out of pure survival instinct. Edward searched his body and discovered documents that were to be delivered to Laureano Torres, the Grand Master of the West Indies Templars. So, always following rewards. He decided to impersonate Duncan and met with Torres. He told her about Bartholomew Roberts, who was another reincarnation of Ida, the second to date, whom the Templars intended to use because, thanks to Isu's memories of him, Roberts knew where to find the observatory, a temple with technology capable of spying on any human on the planet. Seeing that Torres' money was too little, Edward decided to find Roberts and get the observatory at his expense and then sell it to the highest bidder. Along the way, he acquired a ship and a crew and attempted to maintain a pirate republic in Nassau. But as the years went by, most of his friends were killed in one way or another. The republic crumbled, and when he finally found Roberts, he betrayed him and sold him to the Templars. For 4 months, Edward rotted in a Jamaican prison with his last 2 friends, Mary Read and Anne Bonny. But, Mary was actually a murderer, so in the end, the murderers came to her to free her, and in the process, they also freed Edward and Anne, although Mary died in Edward's arms, leaving him very touched and making him suddenly understand that after years of looting and piracy, he had gotten nothing but pain, so he decided to join the assassins just as Mary would have wanted. And after that he executed all the Templars and Roberts, to finally go to the observatory with the assassins and seal the temple forever. Edward returned to England, where he settled and fathered a son, whom he named Haytham, in honor after Hitham the Hidden One, who had founded the Brotherhood on the island of Great Britain in the 9th century. Unfortunately, the English Templars killed Edward shortly after and raised Haytham as one of their own, convincing him of his father's errors and turning him into a completely loyal member of the order. In 1754, Haytham obtained from the London assassins an object that, according to the Templars, it was a key that would open an Isu temple located in North America. A temple that they did not know what it contained, but in any case they wanted it for themselves. So they sent Haytham to Boston for the purpose of finding that temple. He investigated for 2 years until he met Zio, a native who, in fact, she was a descendant of the tribe to which Ivor had entrusted Gorm's Fruit of Eden. She who showed Haytham the entrance to the temple, which in reality was nothing but the great temple where Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno had worked, the same one that Gorm had unearthed. Although Haytham did not know all this, the only thing he saw was that his key was not useful to open the entrance. Therefore, he had no choice but to leave empty-handed, although before that he slept with Zio, leaving her pregnant. Haytham did not return to England, but instead established himself as Grand Master of the United States Templars, and handed the key to his second-in-command, Charlesley. At that time, his greatest enemy was Achilles, the leader of the Brotherhood of American Assassins, under whose orders was the Irishman Shay Patrick Cormac, who travelled to Lisbon to obtain an Isu artifact. But when he picked it up, all he managed to do was make it completely disintegrate. And then a terrible earthquake was triggered that destroyed the entire city and killed thousands of people. Aware that the assassins would cause other earthquakes if he did not prevent them, Shay stole the only map that contained the location of the rest of the tectonic artifacts. But the assassins tried to kill him as a traitor. Renegade, Shay switched sides, joined the Templars, and exterminated the entire Brotherhood of the United States, until only Achilles himself was left alive, whose life Haytham spared after crippling him with a shot to the knee. Still, Haytham did not let Shay stay with him, but instead ordered him to get another artifact that the assassins had. A search that Shay carried out for the next 16 years until in 1776 he found his owner in Versailles and murdered him, leaving a child, little Arnaud Dorian, orphaned. While Shay searched for this artifact, Joe gave birth to a child, Haytham's son, Radohenjiton, who grew up peacefully in his mother's tribe, until one day Charles Lee attacked and razed the village, in which fire Joe was trapped and died. During all the centuries since Ivor gave them the Fruit of Eden, that tribe had consulted him from time to time, and Juno had communicated with them so that they would always protect the great temple, awaiting the arrival of the day when she could be free. And since now the Templars seemed close to gaining control of that land and perhaps opening the temple sooner than she wanted. 9 years after Joe's death, Juno spoke to Radohenjiton to ask him to join the assassins and stop the Templars, with the excuse that this way she would get the only thing he wanted, which was to protect her land and her tribe. Following her instructions, Radohenjiton joined Achilles, who trained him. He turned him into an assassin and put him on the path to hunt down all the Templars in the region, including his own father. Until only Charles Lee remained, whom Radohenjiton killed and took the key of Hezeb. Consulting the fruit one last time, Juno asked him to hide the key in a hidden place. And he obeyed by burying her in the tombs of Achilles' family. Meanwhile, in Versailles, Arnaud Orion, the son of the assassin whom she had eliminated. He was raised by the Templar Grand Master of France, who had not attempted to brainwash him, as at the time they had done in London with Hezem. But at this time the French assassins and Templars were on a truce, and Arnaud Orion was able to grow without problems until he became an adult. However, not all the Templars were happy with the peace, and one of them, Germain, who was actually another reincarnation of the Isu Ida, the third to date, he planned to seize power, so he murdered the Grand Master and all the Templars who were prone to peace. And, seeking both revenge and redemption, Arnaud joined the assassins and fought the Templars in Paris, until finally killing Germain and burying his corpse in the catacombs so that he could never be found. After the death of Edward Kenway and the betrayal of Hezem, the Templars of England took complete control of London, who dominated without opposition for an entire century until the end of the 19th century, at which time its leader was Crawford Sterrick, and the murderers had been relegated to the township of Croydon. None of the assassins of the time believed that it was possible to fight against English Templar control, except for the young twins Jacob and Evie Fry, who decided to reconquer London on their own with the only help of the murderer Henry Green. While Jacob eliminated all the Templar leaders in the city one by one, Evie stole a Templar notebook that talked about an Isu shroud capable of healing any wound. And with Henry's help she discovered a clue in the late Edward's mansion that led her to a key that opened a crypt located under Buckingham Palace. Knowing that Sterrick would be there looking for the same thing as them, Jacob and Evie sneaked into the palace, killed Sterrick, and left the shroud safe in the crypt. Later, Evie would marry Henry, while Jacob, we don't know who she married. But we do know that she had a son who in turn had a daughter, Lydia Fry, who at the beginning of the 20th century worked under Winston Churchill, investigating and hunting German spies in London during World War I. In exchange for Churchill promising to get women the right to vote. Lydia's task ended when she located the German headquarters. She sneaked into it and killed everyone present, including the head of the spies, who was nothing more than another reincarnation of Ida, the fourth so far. Shortly before the start of World War II, in 1937, Templars from around the world came together to jointly found Abstergo Industries, a pharmaceutical company that in later years they would use as a cover to launder money, dedicate all its resources to finding Isu artifacts and finding a way to control the entire population of the entire planet. Among the most outstanding minds who were part of its employees was Warren Vidic, a doctor who investigated DNA until he discovered that each human body contains information from our ancestors. And just as animals know by instinct where or when to emigrate, humans have memories of their ancestors. From this, Vidic developed the Animus, a machine capable of reading and reliving those memories, which he tested on a total of 17 subjects between 1981 and 2012, with the aim of gathering as much information as possible about the assassins and the Isu devices. The most notable of his experiments was that of Daniel Cross, an assassin whom Vidic programmed to be a double agent, and kill the world mentor of the assassins whenever he had the opportunity, a situation that occurred in the year 2000. When Cross murdered the mentor and the Templars began the Great Purge, an operation aimed at eradicating the entire Brotherhood from around the world thanks to the information provided by Cross. Because of this, the assassins were almost completely exterminated and only a few cells survived on the entire planet. One of them was La Granja, a complex located in the United States where Desmond Miles was born in 1987. Son of the assassin William Miles and descendant of both Altair and Ezio and the Kenway family. As such, Desmond was also a hybrid, although in his case chance had caused his genes to have such a high concentration of Isu DNA, as only happened with 1 in 10 million people. In La Granja there were about 30 murderers who lived outside the system and who always talked about the enemy. But they were never attacked, so Desmond ended up not believing them, and thinking that they were all crazy and escaping in 2003, at the age of 16. His father, William, tried to find him, but Desmond used the skills he had learned to leave no trace in any records so that no one could locate him. Thus, he lived peacefully as a waiter in New York, while his father became the mentor of all the remaining assassins, managing them on high-risk missions to continue the fight against the Templars. Among those missions was to infiltrate a young assassin, Lucy Stillman, into Abstergo. and then recruit Clay Kasmarek and order him to allow himself to be captured so that the Templars could use him as a subject in the Animus, assuring him that Lucy was an ally who would protect him and help him escape when the time was right. Clay did so, until he discovered that the Templars had developed a master plan to control the entire world. His intention was to launch a satellite that had a fruit of Eden and thus, from orbit, to be able to control the minds of all human beings on the planet to impose a utopia of eternal peace and order. However, Clay also discovered that the 7 years Lucy had spent away from the killers of her had made her feel abandoned and that she had ended up changing sides. Therefore, when push came to shove, Lucy did not allow him to escape, and Clay, half maddened by the continued use of the Animus, finding himself trapped and unable to get out, he ended up committing suicide. It was right after that when the Templars located Desmond Miles thanks to the only record he had, which was his motorcycle driving license. In early September 2012, Abstergo's men kidnapped him and took him from New York to Rome, where Vidic's facilities were, with the first objective of making him relive the memories of Altair, until you get a map with the locations of all the possible fruits of Eden. And then Lucy gained her trust and got them the fruit of Eden that Ezio had had. And that was exactly what happened. Desmond relived Altair's life in the Animus until he found a map with the fruits of Eden that had been scattered around the world. And then Lucy freed him and escaped with him to a lair where the murderers Sean and Rebecca were waiting for them, with his own Animus model built from sketches stolen from Abstergo. Then Lucy convinced Desmond to relive Ezio's memories, with the excuse that she would thus learn in a few days the training that Ezio had acquired for years. Although in reality her purpose was for Desmond to locate the fruit of Eden that Ezio had hidden in Rome and then deliver it to Vidic. However, something happened that changed everything, which was the Isu's interaction with Desmond. And the message from Minerva that Ezio had seen in the Vatican crypt was addressed to Desmond, who, upon reviving him, discovered that a solar flare would soon explode and destroy all civilization on the planet. And later, when Desmond saw that Ezio had kept his fruit under the Colosseum, he, Lucy, Sean and Rebecca went there to collect it. But as soon as he touched it, his DNA activated the fruit, and Juno showed him that Lucy's intention was to betray him and take the fruit to Vidic, so that the Templars would launch the satellite, and because of that the world would not be saved and everyone would die. So Desmond was forced to kill Lucy. Finally, when he relived Ezio's arrival at Masyaf, he received the second message, that of Jupiter, who told him that to save the world he must go to the Great Temple of the United States. Thereafter, Desmond, Sean and Rebecca were joined by Desmond's father William, whom he had not seen since he had fled the farm, and although the relationship between the two was not the best, they managed to work together to save the world. Thus, once at the entrance to the Great Temple, and with Ezio's fruit in his possession, Desmond opened the door until he reached a large room that had a second door. And then Juno knocked him out of consciousness to guide him through memories until he found Hisam's key in the tomb of Achilles' family. Now, while Desmond relived those memories, Sean discovered that in addition to the key, they would need to connect several batteries to the temple if they wanted to open the last door. So they traveled first to Manhattan and then to Brazil so that Desmond could steal 2 Isu technology batteries. For the third and last one, located in Cairo, William decided to go in his place. But he was captured by Vidic's Templars, who threatened to kill him if they did not bring him the fruit of Eden. Consequently, Desmond traveled to Rome, entered Abstergo's offices and made his way through the building killing all the security guards, including Daniel Cross, until reaching Vidic, killing him as well and taking both his father and the Isu battery. After returning, getting the key and placing the last battery, Desmond opened the last door of the Great Temple. Moment when messages appeared to him from both Juno and Minerva. The first told him that he could protect the world from the solar flare by pressing a simple button. But the second warned him that if he did so he would die and Juno would also be freed and would try to conquer the world. Thinking that even her death and the threat of Juno were better than the destruction of the entire civilization, and resume the cycle of humanity, Desmond decided to sacrifice himself and died, in exchange for a kind of planetary aurora borealis surrounding the Earth, saving it from the solar explosion, which exploded but caused minimal damage. However, that released Juno's consciousness, although she had no physical body and her mind was forced to exist in virtual limbo, as digital consciousness that navigated among human machines. Therefore, the first thing he did was contact several people and convince them that the true nature of humanity was to serve the Isu, thus forming a small army of followers who were baptized as the instruments of the first will. This sectarian group was joined by John Standish, a computer scientist who turned out to be actually another reincarnation of the Isu Ida, the fifth and last to date, who infiltrated Abstergo and then manipulated and used an ordinary employee of the company to hack into the cloud server and have Juno possess her body. Now, Juno was not yet strong enough, she was too scattered wandering around the networks and nodes and was not able to inhabit a living organism. So his plan failed and John was murdered by the Templars, who, studying his corpse, they discovered that it was a reincarnation of Ida. And that led them to the desire to sequence the complete genome of the Isu in order to relieve the history of the Isu with the Animus. And with this learn to develop the technology of the fruits of Eden. To do this, they wanted to search for the bodies of as many incarnations of Ida as possible, such as German. Although as his corpse had been buried in the catacombs. Well, they couldn't get hold of him because his bones were too damaged to be of use to them. Still, in 2015, both Assassins and Templars discovered the location of the shroud that Jacob and Evie had left beneath Buckingham Palace. Both factions fought to achieve it, the Templars won and took the shroud to their facilities. But, a member of the instruments of the First Will had infiltrated among them, whose wish was to obtain a body for Juno, who planned to use the shroud. That she was capable of regenerating any wounds, to rebuild Juno's original Isu body from scratch. Juno's body was reconstructed thanks to the shroud. But then they killed her and the instruments of the First Will were exterminated. Thus ending what until now had been the main villain. But the story did not end here, it continued with Leela Hassan, an engineer at Abstergo. That in October 2017 she was sent to Egypt to locate the mummy of Bayek of Siwa. Leela found the mummy, but since her dream was to participate in the Animus project, she modified her Animus so that she would be able to revive not only the memories of her ancestors, but those of anyone from whom she had a DNA sample. So she tested it with Bayek's mummy to see if her improvements worked and so Abstergo would incorporate her into the project. But since she did all of this secretly and behind the company's back, the Templars became angry with her and sent a team to kill her for insubordination. Fortunately, Leela used the skills she learned in the Animus to wipe out the entire team. And then she accepted William Miles' offer to join the Assassins. Then Leela had the mission of investigating and searching for new artifacts. The first of them being one that was mentioned in a lost work of Herodotus, who claimed to have met a hybrid of the Isu. Herodotus was referring to Cassandra, whose old spear Leela found, and then relived with her the memories of the hybrid, who took her to Atlantis, where Cassandra, who was still alive thanks to the power of the rod. She was manipulated one last time by Aletheia and gave the artifact to Leela to die moments later. In this way, Aletheia's plan was fulfilled, because before the Toba catastrophe, she and Loki had calculated all the possible futures until they found a way to be able to meet again in the future. That inevitably passed through Leela. Well, the reality is that in December 2012, at the same moment that Desmond activated the magnetic that would save the Earth, the machine in which Basim was imprisoned in Norway was turned on again after a millennium in darkness, since Sigurd had extinguished it in the 9th century. That made Basim's consciousness awaken. Although he could not free himself because his body was rotten, but he could wait for Leela to come to him with the scepter. With that in mind, Basim overheated the Isu machine from within to make the world sick, causing the Earth's magnetic field to increase more and more every day, until by 2020 it was already 50,000 times larger than normal, which caused major disruptions in communications, dangerous radiation bands at the poles, an aurora borealis that never faded, very frequent earthquakes and the fall of several satellites. And when he finally located from his machine where Ivor was buried, Basim sent the location of her body to Leela with a message from her warning her that the solar flare would repeat itself once more in the future, and that he had to look for him if she wanted to save the world. Therefore, and with the help of Sean and Rebecca, Leela traveled to the United States. She unearthed Ivor's bones and revived her memories, until Sean and Rebecca deduced that the button Desmond had pressed 8 years ago was still on, and generating a magnetic field from the Norwegian machine. So Leela decided to go there not to turn it off, since the magnetic field had to continue protecting the Earth from the threat of the Sun, but to slow it down, so that the magnetic field loses power but continues to protect it anyway. Furthermore, she had to go with her scepters so that the radiation from the machine would not kill her instantly. And once there she was connected to the machine and slowed down. But then, taking advantage of the fact that the scepter had fallen from his hand when connecting to the machine, Basim disconnected, his hand fell on the Isu artifact and the contact regenerated his tissue and his vital functions, bringing him back to life and allowing him to finally reunite with his beloved Aletheia. Leela stayed behind, connected to the machine, although she was not alone, because in the digital void she found Desmond's consciousness. That he had resided there since 2012, making calculations of possible futures. Desmond had discovered that another solar catastrophe would occur that would wipe out humanity in the future. So she had spent the last 8 years looking for a solution in a timeline where that didn't happen. But when telling Leela, she suggested looking in timelines where the world had not been saved in 2012. Thinking that perhaps the survivors of those barren worlds had learned how to prevent the catastrophe from happening again. To finish her off, even knowing that Evazim had stolen her core and that the radiation would kill her body, Leela decided to stay in the digital void to help Desmond read the futures. And find a solution with which to save the world from the next solar flare. This concludes the complete chronological history of the Assassin's Creed saga to date. Which is not yet finished, but it is planned that new deliveries will continue to come out every year. And I hope you liked the video. Comment and like if so. Subscribe so you encourage me to create more content for you. From time to time, I upload videos of the most varied topics, touching on a little bit of everything. But mainly I focus on my own artwork. Scholastar. I give writing advice. Blender classes. I talk about my experiences in electronics and repairing cell phones. I give other tips about daily life. I like the game of Go, it is simple and profound at the same time, like life itself. And I also share my favorite tastes, so sometimes YouTube censors me from time to time. If you support me with a like, a comment or a subscription, you help me bypass the algorithm censorship. After all, I upload videos with useful information for everyone, and even more so if they share my same tastes. Greetings to all. Until a next video.